We have mentioned Canada's spatial structure in the first part of the lecture series, but just to recap, Canada is the second largest country in the world territorially, not by might, not by people or population, but just of its land territorially. Of course, we have the 10 provinces, 3 territories. The Atlantic provinces, which a lot of people live, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Labrador. And then you have Quebec. One thing about Quebec, and I want to talk about this, is the Cree traditional owners, or the First Nation of Cree. They own the northern half of Quebec. They got some good stuff going on. Let's look at them for a second. Quebec, basically, the French-speaking province of Quebec has always wanted independence. Back in the 70s and 80s, it was called Quebecois, which was a movement to break away from Canada. But something interesting with Quebec is that the Cree, the Native American, I keep going Native Americans, they are Native Americans, but they are First Nation Cree, don't want independence because they worked hard to get their rights under Canadian law. And if Quebec succeeded from Canada, that would get all their hard work of independence for themselves would evaporate in their eyes. We're going to watch a little something about the Cree. I think it's important to get a concept of Canada through their eyes. And so let's watch this for a second. All right, I'm just going to start it.
For most of the year, the hunting grounds of the Cree are icebound. But in the brief northern summer, these stretches of forest are connected by a chain of lakes.
Gives you kind of an idea of what it looks like.
Matthew Cooncum had us flown to the far reaches of Lake Mistassini to see the areas that Hydro-Quebec had wanted to flood.
Hydro-Quebec is a massive electrical, kind of like an electrical Hoover Dam type project, and would be flooding out a lot of their lands. In your book, it talks about on page 51. They talk about their territory, and you'll see it in the map on page 51. It's shown above the northern half of Quebec and above the red dashed line. And it contains the James Bay Hydroelectric Project, a massive scheme of dikes and dams that will affect them. So let's watch more.
The young Grand Chief led the campaign that stopped those plans. But now he stepped into the middle of an even bigger fight.
We as Aboriginal peoples are caught between the disputes between the English and the French, constantly fighting over land which is not theirs in the first place. And we're caught in the middle. That is the dilemma, because of them wanting to split up a country.
Matthew Cooncum had brought us to his favourite fishing spot in the middle of the lake.
My people are hunters, they're fishermen, so they live off the land. So they come here and leave.
You see how he said it goes back to the English and French that several hundred years ago, battling over land that wasn't theirs. That sticks out, doesn't it? And so they see themselves as the rightful owner of the land, which they are, and they see this James Bay Hydroelectric power plant project as destructive to their way of life.
The village around September, and they look for small or big game like moose or bear, and trapping for mink, otter, etc. So they'd be spending almost 6 months of the year here. Yeah.
By summer, most of the hunting is finished. This is the season to fish.
So relaxing, and it's amazing just to be out here, out on the land.
The lake and its forests are divided into hunting grounds, used by Cree families for generations.
The greatest accomplishment of my people is not that we build great dams or build great pyramids or to build monuments for ourselves, but to leave the land the way it is, the way our ancestors saw it, the way my father saw it, my grandfather. That's the greatest accomplishment.
Though only 40 years old, Matthew Cooncombe has seen tremendous changes in his own lifetime.
From the time I was a child until now, definitely I have seen where we came from just snowshoes and dog teams. Now we have skidoos and trucks, and when you get to our lands we use airplanes. And the reality is that I think development will happen, but we would like to have a say as to the pace that happens, and to be able to at least try to hold back, delay, and to allow for our people time for the land to heal, a time for my people to adapt to those changes that are happening so fast.
The Cree have adapted and still kept much of what they had, but they fear that all that may be for nothing if Canada splits.
I believe that Quebec wanting to separate from Canada is probably the greatest threat since the arrival of the Europeans.
There are 12,000 Cree in isolated small towns throughout the northwest of Quebec. Mistassini is where Matthew Cooncombe was born. He became the chief here when he was 24 and Grand Chief of Quebec's Cree in 1987. He's so popular that he's won every election since then by a wide margin. Along with all the children of his generation, he was taken south to Indian boarding school. When he was 16, he made the discovery that would shape his life.
And I picked up a newspaper of the Montreal Star at that time, if I remember correctly, and looked at the proposed map in which it showed that Mistassini Lake would be used as a reservoir. And looking at it more closely, realizing that the area where I grew up would be underwater. The area that I knew as a peninsula would become an island.
He was looking at the plans of Hydro-Quebec and its multi-billion-dollar project to dam the rivers of the Northwest. Without the knowledge of the Cree, engineers and politicians had decided to harness the energy of the great rivers flowing into James Bay. That was when the young Matthew Cooncombe decided to become a lawyer.
My father used to say, you have to go, you have to learn the white man's ways, and you have to try to understand them, and then you'll have to come back, because we will need people that understand their ways, maybe to prevent from them carrying out these insane projects as we saw them.
But in 1975, an older generation of Cree leaders signed the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, allowing the first stage of the hydroelectric project to go ahead, a deal most of the Cree would soon come to regret. An immense dam was built on the La Grande River. As the full scale of the project became clear, shifting Cree towns, flooding hunting grounds, new Indian leaders led by Matthew Cooncum vowed to stop its planned expansion. There were heated demonstrations at the site of the next phase. For Hydro-Quebec's plans had become so ambitious that they were making deals to supply electricity to the whole eastern seaboard of the USA. It took an international campaign led by Matthew Cooncum to stop the expansion. But the Cree now fear with some justification that the separatists who run Quebec will revive those plans if Quebec gains its independence.
I think in the future it will be inevitable. Is it the right moment to do it right now? Or maybe in 5 years, 10 years? I don't know. But my understanding is that one of these days, anyway, we will have to do it.
The Cree know how much harder it will be to stop that development if their lands become part of a new country desperate for income. A separate Quebec will want to exploit the water, the minerals, and the forests. As if by the hand of a capricious giant, 150-foot trees are torn from the ground. "24 hours a day, all year round, these machines are operating in the virgin forest of the Northwest."
We will talk about the arboreal forest. I'm going to stop here. We get the idea that development of the Cree land is a bad idea, and that'd be something good to really ponder on your assignment as we move forward. Okay, real quick. English is spoken in about 75% of the 75% of the population. Queen Elizabeth is head of state. Canada is part of the British Commonwealth. They're still very much loyal to the crown, which is kind of cool when you think about it. Okay, here's the indigenous people of Canada, or what we would call our Native Americans, but with Canadians, our First Nation, the Inuit, the Métis, and the Cree. They represent almost 4% of the Canadian population. And again, your assignment, pick one, write about them. I recommend the Cree because they're battling Quebec. It's very interesting and kind of fun to kind of delve into their world. This is page 52, showing you the racial makeup of the United States. Pretty straightforward. Nothing new to talk about as far as if you're interested in that sort of thing. I'm not going to run a test question on it, but it just kind of gives you an idea who makes up what. Percent of Asians versus Hispanic versus African Americans, percent Native Americans, and see where everybody is distributed. Again, this is called a choropleth map, CHOROPLETH. It's very useful in showing population averages and aggregate data. Okay, well, we're going to run into the regions of North America, southeast. That's on page, let's see, page 54 of your book. And It's pretty much self-explanatory. I'm not going to do a lot with it. It's just good to know they're there. Shows obviously where we live, the southeast. The core is the manufacturing belt, the southwest. You pretty much see it, western frontier, and I can't read it from here, but the continental interior, and it's just kind of, and up here is I can't see it, the French Canadian area up here. It's okay. Again, I'm not going to see much questions coming from this on any test. North American core is where all the action is. Let me go back. So you have your dominant media centers. Just think New York, okay? Just think New York. New York has everything. And Washington, D.C., the federal capital. Biggest airports, except Atlanta, Hartsfield, and Chicago's O'Hare. 1/3 of the population lives there. So just kind of, again, I'm not going to put a lot of emphasis in this. We've got so much to cover in here. So just let you know it's there. Maritime Northeast, timber, fishing, slower economic development. No surprise there. Just kind of something you'd probably already know. Okay, French Canada, of course, we're talking also, we just talked about the Cree and their James Bay Hydroelectric Project, but we have St. Lawrence River, Montreal to the river's mouth, French-speaking Acadians, natural gas in the St. Lawrence Basin, which is a new one. I wasn't aware of that, but they did discover natural gas. Just kind of give you what's going on in French Canada, but we've already talked about really the problems of French Canada with Quebec. Okay, this is our area of the world. They talk about Atlanta and Miami. They don't talk about South Carolina, but okay, a lot of good stuff going on. So anything Atlanta, CNN, which is kind of a little dated. CNN has moved a lot of its offices. And Miami, a big seaport. Also, they didn't mention Savannah, which is a huge port, and Charleston. They didn't mention that. Again, not much here, and no questions coming forth. Southwest, you think of Houston and Dallas. You even think of NASA, really, in Houston. Oil and gas, of course, and also the biggest North American free trade agreement is directly connected to the Southwest. All these regions are on 56, 55, 56, 57, 58. Suggest if you'd like to read about them, you can. Use your book. It's self-explanatory. Pacific Hinge, as it's called, Mexico to Vancouver, San Diego, LA, San Francisco, everything from high tech to, as they say, California is the 12th largest economy in the world, and for good reason. So if California was its own country, it would be the 12th most economically viable country in the world. Pretty impressive. So that's that. Western frontier on page 57 of your book includes Utah, Idaho, Nevada, parts of Alberta and British Columbia. It's a lot of small businesses and technical, kind of a technopole, a technical center, Salt Lake City. So, and ranches and farms and just pretty much what you would think would be out there. I can't think much more about it. It's do read it on page 57. And of course, Las Vegas and the Western frontier. We know about Las Vegas. A pretty cool place to live, though. A lot of cheap land, low cost housing. Of course, your obvious gambling and all that, kind of neat. And the continental interior. Remember, I talked about the Ogallala aquifer. This is where all your food comes from: meat, beef, pork, corn belt, soybeans, winter wheat. This is the flyover states where a lot of people are leaving that area for the cities, and it's getting to be more and more of a deserted place. We've already talked about this, the Canadian Shield, and of course the Canadian Shield has a lot of metals in it because of the glacier action. A lot of stuff was pushed together And so you have metallic ores and uranium, copper, gold, silver, lead, and zinc, and of course Yukon and the Northwest Territory, gold and diamonds. And diamonds is surprising because why is it that there? Well, because diamonds, there's Yukon, come from volcanoes. So no surprise, there's volcanic activity way back when. And so it's kind of a neat place to look at. Um, I like this. I like this about the diamonds. I really do. I think that's so cool. And we've already mentioned this, Alberta. That's where the Canadian Tar Sands Project, one of the largest reserves. Calgary, because of that, is the fastest expanding major city in Canada. So that's kind of cool. And I think that's about it. I think we're going to wrap this up. Well, the northern frontier, yeah, that's where, let's talk about that. That's where the Cree are, the Canadian boreal forest. You saw this in the film about the Cree, that you saw these dense strands of coniferous needle leaf tree, 150 feet high, being pushed over. It's a lot of look at the territory of the boreal forest. It's beautiful and it's wild and it's cold and it's disappearing because of the perceived need for destruction and development. We'll end it right here. It's a lot to talk about, a lot to think about, and this is our last video.